Hi, my name's Kirsty Page, and in this recording, we're going to take a closer look at fine motor skills, thinking about why they're so important for phonic readiness and progression, and for wider writing, but also for things like self-help skills and creativity. But we're going to think mainly not just about why they're important, but about the practical implications of implementing a targeted, systematic approach for fine motor. Of course, things that we do with groups of children and adult-led activities can build fine motor skills. Of course they can. But really fine motor skills, which for those of you who have got Launchpad is in this right-hand kind of pinky type column, is the skill strand that lends itself the most to our use of our learning environment and our targeted use of daily routines. And although that is very much a core of our EYFS practice, I think even those of us who work with older children but who still need to be backtracked to build these fundamental foundation skills to remove barriers, that we need to consider what opportunities we've got in our learning environment, not just to prepare children, but to create backtracking embedded intervention opportunities and using our learning environment to the best of its potential. So when I'm thinking about fine motor, and if we look at the skill steps that are described as we go up Launchpad, what I'm actually looking at is I'm looking at a sequence of skills that are reflecting four main sub-areas of fine motor developing. And when I'm thinking about my learning environment, when I'm thinking about what my children need, and when I'm thinking about what opportunities do I need to create and for who, it is useful to think about fine motor as four kind of component sub skills rather than just thinking about fine motor generally. So I want to be thinking about hand-eye coordination, which is the most fundamental skill because it's how my brain allows my hand to engage with the world and objects in the world, or mark making tools, for example. I want my children to have manipulative skill. I want my children to be able to manipulate their digits together or their fingers together, or to manipulate them independently. I want my children to have something that we don't consider enough, finger and hand strength, so that not only can I cope with those buttons on my coat, but I can tie shoelaces, but also I can cope with letter formation and later on more sustained writing as I get older. And although it's not kind of a sub-skill as such, it's kind of more like a neurological pattern. I want my children to slowly be realising that when we count, or when we write patterns, or later on when we write, that we go from left to right. And of course that's visual for reading, but it's also a motor-based left to right programming as well. So before we think about having to make lots of changes to have a more systematic and targeted approach, I think what we need to start with is a combination of, well, what opportunities have I already got, and what type of skill opportunities do they create? Because there's no doubt that you will have lots going on already, not just thinking about your resources in your learning environment, but also thinking about those really valuable daily routine opportunities. But then also, what are my children's skills like? And do my opportunities match my children's needs and next steps? Do I actually need to be moving some of my children on and creating more demanding, progressive opportunities? But do I need to maybe go back and offer some more inclusive opportunities for some children? So that combination of considering what you've got already in your children then allows you to kind of think about whether those correlate, the children and what you're offering, whether they correlate, and does it correlate for all children? And you can begin to think about, well, what might we need to do more of? What else do we need to do? What might we need to bring into our learning environment, or what additional opportunities can I weave into my daily routines to build this skill? And remembering that the learning environment isn't static. As my children progress, it might be that the fine motor opportunities that I have available want to gradually become more demanding as some of my children move on, but that I keep some inclusive opportunities, because for some children I need to go back to earlier levels of success. And I think in all of these little videos, it's this concept of my learning environment creates opportunities. So I need to be in control of my learning environment, just not just setting it up and making it look lovely, but making sure that my learning environment creates, at this moment in time, the opportunities I need for all of my children, for some of my children, and the opportunities I need for some of my target children with more significant needs. So we've got kind of this progressive but also inclusive kind of mindset as we're creating opportunities and using those opportunities in a targeted way with children. I think don't forget those daily routines. I know I've said that already, but I mean, even if we were thinking about, when children are having a little snack, the fine motor value of peeling, the fine motor value, particularly with much younger children, of having to pick up currants or little pieces. Or the daily routines, their finger and hand strength value of having to turn a tap on and off, the finger and hand strength value of having to open containers, clippy lids, and lifting off those lids and then closing them. So again, we can often just create additional opportunities by making the most of those things that we're doing already, but tweaking things slightly. We also need to remember the value of action songs and rhymes, so very much for gross motor movements and copying, but that as I morph into finger and hand rhymes, really the manipulative opportunities that they bring, and also thinking about, do the songs and the finger rhymes that I'm using match the level of my children, and do I want to do a bit more of that if at the same time I'm thinking that my children need more fine motor input. And I think really, I think we all know about the value of mark making tools and mark making on the floor, on walls, on pieces of paper, and how that kind of evolves over time. But I don't think we should forget the fine motor opportunities that our creative materials provide for children. And certainly mark making is important, don't get me wrong, but learning how to cut with scissors holds a lot of fine motor value. Not just having Play-Doh, but maybe sometimes having modelling clay, or certainly if I'm wanting to develop finger and hand strength, making things like plasticine available. So not only do they create different creative opportunities, because you can do different things with those materials, but they are also harder and more difficult. So they create finger and hand strength at a much deeper level than just Play-Doh. So there's nothing wrong with Play-Doh. I'm just saying it's about kind of thinking about what you create, what opportunities you create by what you put out in your environment. And remembering those creative materials are essential for language and for symbolic skill development, which on Launchpad is here, but also those language opportunities. So not just naming what you're making, but the verbs, that you're rolling or you're pulling or you're twisting, and the concepts around what those creative materials feel like and look like. So again, we never facilitate just one skill. Even if we're thinking about one thing mainly, we've always got other skills coming in and being added into the mix. If we're thinking about inclusivity, I think we're all very aware of the need to make our mark making tools inclusive, that some of our children still might need chunky pens or chunky chalks or palm chalks for longer than others, and if not, they might kind of shy away from mark making activities and from drawing. But I think we also just need to quickly throw in to make our books inclusive, and this is a bit about inclusivity for supporting children to engage and listen with books, but it's also is important for children's fine motor skills and maybe their ability to open and close books and to turn pages independently. So again, for inclusivity and for facilitating engagement, You know, it might be that for some children, I still want to have some books with flaps. It might be that for a little bit longer, I still want to have some books with movable parts. I might still want to have some books that are card books with thick card pages because they're easier to turn. And moving a little bit on, some books that still have hardbacks rather than always having floppy laminated books, because they are easier to hold and easier to manipulate if a child's fine motor skills are not at the level of maybe some of the other children. And again, you'll have lots of ideas. You know, the starting point is your children and your learning environment. But I'm just going to finish off by also saying just prioritize drawing. So I think particularly in schools, we're thinking about writing and wanting to move children into writing and writing their name and beginning to write letters, sometimes too soon and too quickly. But if we think about the fine motor skills and the kind of similar movements that children will learn as they draw, and particularly if I draw alongside children and model drawing and talk about what I'm drawing and model different movements, it has a great value for writing preparation. And again, for children who struggle with writing who are older, you know, that going back and, you know, not just doing more and more writing, but understanding the value that drawing. So drawing kind of is valuable for the fine motor point of view, and for learning how to manipulate and control fine motor mark making tools. But also drawing has that language value, the vocabulary around what we're drawing, the vocabulary around how we're drawing it and the movements that we're making, and the symbolic and creative skills that will support in our children, which will come back to support our children when they're a little bit older and they want to create and write their own stories. Okay, well, lots more ideas we could talk about, but I think that's probably enough for now. Thank you.